Ontario, of course, no longer the unambiguous powerhouse of the Canadian economy. Joining us now to tell us how their Jobs and Prosperity Council is working to change that, Gord Nixon. He's CEO of the Royal Bank of Canada, and Jim Stanford. He's economist for the Canadian Auto Workers Union, and it's good to have you two gentlemen both at our table tonight.
Thanks, Steve.
Start us off, Mr. Chairman. What's the Council's mandate?
Well, the mandate is to look at Ontario and really identify things that the province has to do to ensure that we position ourselves for the future as opposed to being positioned for the past. As you said, the world is changing. Ontario's role in Canada, let alone the world, is changing. And we have to adapt to sort of the new reality. And to some degree, the mandate is to create a call to action for the people of Ontario. I think that's extremely important, to identify the fact that we have to do things differently in the future. We have to change the way we compete and the way we position ourselves. And then on a broad base to identify some themes and make some broad-based recommendations that government will have to respond to deal with some of the things that make it more challenging for some of our businesses to compete.
And recommendations are due when?
Recommendations we hope will be out sometime in December. It was scheduled to be early in the new year, but given the politics of Ontario, we're trying to move it forward so that these areas will be, part of the leadership discussion for the Liberal Party, and ultimately, depending on how politics unfold, hopefully will be a big part of the election debate as well.
Jim, I'm curious about your involvement in this because I can't imagine there's much about the Ontario economy that you as a Labour economist and he as a bank president, CEO, could see similarly. Am I wrong about that?
Oh, you might be surprised,
so
actually.
Tell me.
I mean, look, Steve, there are, I think, 13 CEOs on the panel and me. So to even the odds, I promise to tie one hand behind my back.
Very good,
okay,
yeah.
So that we can have a good dialogue. But first of all, it's a very nonpartisan exercise. The thing was announced as part of the last provincial budget, and we've had all kinds of discussions and debates about the fiscal situation in Ontario and how bad it is. But we sometimes forget that the deficit itself is not the problem. The deficit is the result of the problem, which is that underlying deterioration in our base economy. Our manufacturing was our pillar, and it's been through a crisis. Our other tradable, exportable industries have also been in trouble, and that's what's dragged down the job market, that's what's dragged down incomes, that's what's dragged down the provincial budget. So what we're trying to do here is, put some attention back at the economic base of the province and say, look, we've got to have some proactive thinking, some strategies, some industrial policies, if you like, to get those sectors of the economy back in gear, and that will generate the incomes and the tax revenues and everything else that will help to repair the fiscal situation.
But surely there are a lot of people considering this very question right now, and I'm wondering what you think you and your group can come up with that's a magic bullet that nobody's already thought of.
Well, if they're looking for a magic bullet, they're going to be disappointed, because obviously there is no magic bullet. What we are going to do is, I think, put some attention into the whole area of sort of the concrete bread and butter part of our economy, in particular the private sector of the economy, where we need investment, we need exports, we need productivity, we need infrastructure. And again, as Gord said, remind people that that is what makes Ontario prosperous. The public services part of it is crucial, and it adds an essential dimension to our quality of life, and we have to pay for those services. But we also need those other industries, the auto industry, the manufacturing sector, the financial services sector, even our own resources sectors. We often forget that Ontario is a major resource supplier. We need all of those things in gear to be generating the income in the first place that we can collect taxes from and pay for public services.
As you look at this economy, this provincial economy, what do you see that it's got going for it?
Well, going for it, firstly, you've got a talent base in this province which is second to none anywhere in the world. And that's one of the great things about Canada, and Ontario is a shining example of a talented workforce, how multiculturalism works, and if you believe in playing to your strengths, we've got a remarkable talent base. We've got a very competitive tax regime now in Ontario. We didn't in the past, we do now. So from a tax perspective, the ability for businesses to invest in this province are very strong.
But right there, you guys disagree, because you think corporate taxes are probably where they ought to be, and you think corporate taxes could go up a few points, right?
or that we could restructure the taxes so that they were putting more emphasis on investment and leveraging investments.
So how are we going to get a sort of a single coherent voice out of your council when you disagree on something that fundamental?
Well, for one thing, we're not going to be overly granular in our recommendations. And this is where we don't want to disappoint in terms of our recommendations. I mean, we're not here to set tax policy, to set educational policy, to establish the rules for R&D investment, for business supports, et cetera. We're looking at all of those areas, and we're going to be making some macro recommendations and some micro recommendations that will put significant pressure, we hope, on the government and on the civil service to deal with those areas and to, if you will, do the plumbing around them. So we're not going to make recommendations on what statutory tax rate should be or what business tax rate should be, but we are going to get into things like incentives and so forth. And even on the tax front, I don't think anyone believes that business taxes should necessarily go up. I think people.
Well, he does.
Well, people will debate the fact that we need to ultimately balance the budget. We have to get the right balance between our tax revenues and our expenditures. And there's different ways to generate revenues. Business taxes being one of them, income taxes, value-added taxes, or the GST, PST as we refer to them. And all of those things I think are an important part of the debate. But I think everybody would agree that we want to have, from a business perspective, a competitive environment so that we attract business investment into this province. And that's as important to Jim and to his constituency as it is to business and business constituency.
When you got it on the tax front, you got a situation where the finance minister put a hold on the further reductions in the corporate tax in the budget, saying, listen, we're going to pause for this moment. We're going to look at the fiscal outlook and appointed our council as a way to say, what else can we do to get the job creation machine in gear in the meantime?
He'd like to cut taxes further, but he can't right now for political reasons, right?
And we'll see if there's a range of other measures that we can put, ones that would get sectoral buy-in from different stakeholders that could say, in the meantime, these are things we could be doing to help manufacturing, to help resources,
like
to
what?
help.
Because you say you're not here to make tax policy or education policy, but you do have to come up with something. So what are the kinds of things that you're looking at to spur on what you've just referred to?
Well, we aren't obviously at the final stage yet with our recommendations, so that'll come out in December, as Gord said. What we're headed for, and for example, I work on
December's a few days away there, Jim, and they haven't got much time left.
I work on the manufacturing subcommittee of this council. So my co-chair is Michael McCain from Maple Leaf Foods. So we've been looking at this whole issue of the so-called problem of dead money that Mark Carney was talking about. The companies have got money, but they're not investing it at the pace that we need them to be investing it in new capital. So we're looking at a whole gamut of potential different ways to get that dead money in motion in the economy. Encourage companies to take the plunge, even though there's uncertainty out there, and say, okay, this is what we've got going for us in Ontario, perhaps in partnership with the government and other stakeholders. Are there things we can do to accelerate their decisions to make it happen?
Can you give us an idea on that?
Yeah, well, firstly, on the alignment thing, just a quick story. I mean, it was interesting that Michael and Jim co-chaired the manufacturing committee, and one of the things that Michael said when he came delivering their first report, he said, it's amazing. I think with respect to everything we discussed and our views on everything, we agreed on about 99.9% of the items. And I'm not sure either could remember the 0.1% they didn't disagree on. So manufacturing is one sector. We're also looking at entrepreneurship and innovation, being another subcommittee, going global, which is an extremely important part of the call to action. I mean, in reality, we have a province whose trade patterns are the same as they were at the time of Confederation, where essentially 94%, I think it is, of our trade is with the United States and Europe. We live in a world where all the growth is outside of the developed world. If you're going to trade with the part of the world that's growing at 1 or 2%, then you're not going to grow your own prosperity. You've got to breach out. So
what prohibits us from trading more with African countries which are growing at 7%, or Brazil, or et cetera?
Yeah, well, nothing prohibits us. It's just a question of making sure that we have in place the right programs, the right supports to encourage our small and medium-sized business, as well as our large business, but this is very much around small and medium-sized business as well, to expand their trade patterns. I would say the biggest reason that our trade patterns are so narrow is partially because we've had the benefit in the past of living north of the biggest economy in the world that represented, I think at its peak, close to 60% or 50% plus of global GDP. That is now down to below 40%, moving down, well below that. And as a result, we have to adapt. So to some degree, one of our weaknesses is because we've had this huge benefit in the past, but that benefit's not going to exist in the future, so we've got to change.
Do you think unions inhibit the kind of adaptation you think this economy needs to do in order to be better?
No, I don't think so at all, but I think a large part of the transformation of the Canadian economy is not just supporting manufacturing, but also supporting innovation, supporting entrepreneurship, supporting emerging industries that are ultimately going to be the future as opposed to the past. And how do we support those sectors and how do we broaden those sectors? So this is not an issue of business versus labor. I think one of the things that we would all agree on with respect to the manufacturing sector is that we should stop talking about how manufacturing in this province is a dying sector and start talking about how do we revitalize manufacturing. We can't compete on low-cost labor, but we can compete on higher valued manufacturing. And there are sectors that we have to support to find ways of doing that. And I think that is one of the unifying things that will come out of this.
So what does the union have to say about innovation, entrepreneurship, those kinds of things?
Oh, we'd love to see more of it, especially entrepreneurs who come along with a good idea for a product or service that we can sell to the rest of the world, that we can produce productively, and that we can negotiate a good income from. There's good examples of other economies in the world that, despite the pressures of globalization and despite the downturn of the last few years, have actually expanded their export-oriented manufacturing, places like Germany, Korea, Brazil. And in those cases, it was not a question of one stakeholder trying to beat down the other and say your wages are too high, take less, or vice versa. It was actually a question of stakeholders coming together with government as an active participant around a deliberate, proactive strategy to develop the sorts of industries that can sell high-value, profitable stuff to the rest of the world. And if they can do it, I think we can do it, but it does mean we have to rise above some of the, I think, traditional partisan beating each other up. And perhaps this council is the example of something we used to do. Bring the stakeholders together, and can we figure out something that can work for the whole economy?
Steve, some of the other things we're looking at are things like business supports. We're looking at things like the regulatory burden, which is a huge issue for small and medium-sized business. We are looking at things like procurement in the province, infrastructure. It's a very broad mandate, and that's where I say we have to be very careful. I mean, we could come up with 50 recommendations around each of our areas of focus, but really what I think we have to do as a province is we have to, as I say, a bit of a call to action, recognize the world's changing. Global trade patterns are changing. We have to adapt. We have to make sure that we're developing, the right workforce for the future. We have to make sure that we're equipping large business as well as small business with everything that we possibly can to adapt to that. Because as you say, there's no magic bullet. But if we don't plant a very good garden, then not a lot's going to grow. And part of this is to ensure that we're planting the right garden.
Let me do one follow-up on that, though. You say there's far too much regulation out there that inhibits the growth that we need in businesses. One person's regulation, unnecessary, annoying regulation, is another person's, this is how we make sure we have safe drinking water.
Right.
So when you say we got too many unnecessary regulations, what are you referring to?
Well, we need balance. I mean, in reality, it's, there's no perfect world out there. I mean, every decision involves trade-offs, and we have to ensure that we've got the right structure in place to ensure that the right trade-offs are being made. No one is suggesting that we should throw away environmental rules and regulations to encourage business to do things. But if you ask small and medium-sized business what the biggest inhibitor is to investment, they will tell you regulation and uncertainty.
Are we over-regulated, Jim?
Well, the discussion that we've had, I think, is more around how do you take the regulations that are in place, and there is a good reason for every one of those regulations, and make it more efficient in terms of how the regulations are applied, so that you can protect the drinking water and the other goals of the regulation.
But there's a good reason for every regulation that's in place in
just
Ontario
about
today?
Well, like you said, every it's drinking water. It's other goals that were there. It's a regulation about not talking on the cell phone while you're driving. There's a reason for
Maybe
those
there
things.
is one area where I disagree. There's a lot of regulations that probably people that were put in place that people aren't even aware of today. But in reality, if you look at the way decisions are made, often many ministries are involved in approvals. The people applying those rules and regulations are terrific people, and they're experts in their field, but they're applying them in a very narrow fashion. Things like what is the impact on economic development? What is the impact on prosperity? Aren't factored into that. And to some degree, again, I think we have to change the mindset to ensure that the right incentives are in place, the right criteria are in place, so that we're actually making decisions that are factoring in things like jobs, economic prosperity, employment. That doesn't mean, as I say, you throw away environmental policies, but surely those types of things should all be factored into the vast regulatory rules and processes that we have in place. And so, to some degree, this is a bit of a rethink.
Jim, do we have a productivity problem in Ontario?
Yes, we do. Our productivity has been stagnant. The reason we have a productivity problem is not because people don't work hard. In fact, people work harder than ever. The main reason we have a productivity problem is we're not producing the right mix of high-value goods and services, and we're not using the right techniques to do so. That relates back to the problem of underinvestment by business in new technology. So the way to address productivity is to precisely build the sorts of firms, the sorts of industries, the sorts of clusters that are producing high-value, innovative, technology-intensive stuff that the rest of the world will buy. That's how the Koreans and the Germans and the Brazilians are lifting up their productivity dramatically. So this is, in a way, I think, resuscitating the whole idea of industrial strategy for Ontario, the idea that you need to have proactive attention to those sectors that offer the greatest potential for that type of growth down the road.
But do you, as a CEO, get nervous when you hear the expression, we need the government more deeply involved as a partner at the table?
Well, some of the things we're talking about is to have the government less involved at the table, things like regulatory burden and so forth. But I think that look, government can do so much, and as I say, part of the role of government is to lay the garden, and that is something that governments do everywhere, including not just in Canada, but in the United States, in every industrialized country, and every emerging market as well. And I think that for an economy to be successful, then labor, business, government, academia, you've got to have everybody pulling in the same direction. And to some degree, that's what we're attempting to do here, is to try to make sure that we've got the right alignment, that we've got the right policies in place that will enable risk takers to take risks, that'll enable entrepreneurs to do what entrepreneurs do best, that'll enable the banks to do what banks do, and the auto companies to do what the automotive companies do.
Is a provincial Liberal government capable of that kind of vision?
We are definitely a nonpartisan organization, and we're not, obviously this is the Premier's Jobs and Prosperity Council, but we are meeting with the NDP and we're meeting with the Conservatives. We're meeting with a number of other organizations as well. So to answer your question, absolutely they're capable of it, as is any government. It's a question of will, and some of the most proactive and business-friendly governments, or economic-friendly governments, I should say, have come from very different stripes, if you will, if you look at different provinces and, even at the federal level. So absolutely, they're capable.
You followed the Ontario Liberal leadership race a little bit so far, 6 candidates. Do any one of them seem to get this better than the others so far?
I honestly wouldn't know, and I actually haven't followed the Ontario leadership race that closely.
I'm just trying to suss you out a little bit here.
Yeah, I'm not partisan myself. I'm not a member of a party myself. I think that the ideas we're putting out there are ideas that should have a life beyond any particular party platform. And that's why I agreed to participate in this. I'm willing to talk to government and business and others about how we build the base industries in Ontario needs. I think there's a lot of opportunity in Ontario that we haven't taken advantage of in those industries. And I think that this can be a productive exercise beyond those political considerations. One
of the things we hope for, and we hope the media will help out on this, is that the leadership candidates, and ultimately, if there is an election, will be required to not only respond, but to develop some views. They can disagree with some of the things that we'll be recommending. But these things have to be addressed. And one of the things that we are going to have in our report is a request for the government, whichever government it is, in 12 months to come back and to sit back and do a bit of a scorecard around some of these areas and where we have made changes. Because to some degree, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to measure. You've got to have some degree of accountability around these areas. Because if we don't, we'll just continue to tread water. So, hopefully this will be a bit of a catalyst for some hopefully healthy political debate.
In our last couple of minutes here, I'm going to ask each of you a bit of a touchy-feely question. You're from where originally?
Alberta.
But you've been here for
25 years.
25 years. When you see your home province going gangbusters like it is most of the time these days, although the news recently was a little distressing, but does it make you wistful? Because that's what Ontario used to be.
Yes, the champion of the country
Yeah.
and the center of political power as well as
Correct.
economic power. Although I'm worried about Alberta, I'm worried about my home province too, because they put all their eggs in one basket, which is digging stuff out of the ground and exporting it south. In Ontario, we have the potential for a more diversified, I think, prosperous long-term economy. And I think we can get it back. It's not as easy as digging stuff out of the ground, although frankly in Ontario there's a lot to dig out of the ground as well. But we want to do more than that. We want to take those resources and add value to them and build something more sophisticated and sustainable. So yes, it makes me wistful, but I think we can do even better here.
And where are you from originally?
From Montreal.
Montreal. So you have seen, because it happened in 1976, you've seen that sucking sound of jobs just leaving a province very quickly and coming west. Are we past the point of no return in Ontario?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, when you actually look at the numbers, the Ontario government has held its own pretty well. And if you look at population growth, Ontario continues to do very well. I mean, look what's happening in this city. I mean, it's absolutely going gangbusters. So I think, though, that you know, you've raised what is a great example. Western Canada is probably going to be the fastest growing part of Canada. So what is Ontario's strategy with respect to capitalizing the growth in Western Canada? I mean, Jim's right. I mean, energy, development in the north, those are all significant things. Well, they're going to require a lot of goods that are manufactured. So how do we make sure that Ontario is actually doing the best it can to capitalize on the growth of Western Canada? You know, how do we know that, how do we make sure that Ontario actually has a policy and a good industrial policy around the north? I mean, we talk a lot about the north, and we talk a lot about the Ring of Fire. Do we really know what our strategy and what our policy is around, you know, capitalizing on the resources that exist within this province? So I'm not worried at all about it. I mean, I think that Ontario can benefit. What's good for Western Canada is ultimately good for Ontario. And I think that sometimes we sit back in this province and we say, you know, what's good for Western Canada means high energy prices and a high dollar, and it's bad for Ontario. You know, there's nothing you can do about that, and it's not necessarily so. What's good for Western Canada is good for Ontario. Ontario's got to figure out how to take advantage and capitalize on it. And the biggest beneficiary in this country, other than Alberta, of oil sands development, of energy development, of mega projects in the West is the province of Ontario, because we sell more to those provinces than, you know, does any other province. So, you know, we've got to change the dialogue a little bit.
Okay. Gentlemen, good luck with your report, which we look forward to seeing in not too distant future. Gord Nixon, President CEO, Royal Bank of Canada, the Chair of the Jobs and Prosperity Council, Jim Stanford, the economist with the CAW, and the one non-CEO on that Jobs and Prosperity Council. Good of both of you to join us at TVO tonight. Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.